People look at me and probably think of me as a collector, but I really am not a collector. I think collectors are a different breed altogether. I'm definitely obsessed by old cars, or obsessed by cars generally, or machines. And I'm very grateful, I'm very lucky, don't get me wrong, I'm desperately lucky, and I know how lucky I am to have this stuff, but everything I have has got a purpose. Or it's a particular car that I went after. So I know a lot of collectors will have a wish list, they'll have a generic list of cars that they want to have in their collection. Whereas I'm the other way around. I'm very much, there's a particular car I want, or there's a particular model I want, or a particular something, and I will go to, well, some people see unreasonable lengths to try and get those particular cars or particular machines. And whether that means that I'm a bit weird, I don't know, but it certainly seems normal for where I'm sitting anyway. It seems perfectly normal because you're driven by those passions, and it is very much a passion or an obsession. It's easy to say that my motorsport is not about winning, but it really isn't about winning. It comes back to that obsession, that passion about using the cars. And I remember when I bought, the first car pretty much I bought was the Monarch, which I bought from Mark. And Mark had dominated the Edwardian races. He'd won everything with the Monarch, and he'd reset all the records, hill climb records, because it was the first aero-engine Edwardian special. Just before he sold it to me, there was another car called a Schneider, Russia Schneider, built by David Baker, who's lovely, and the car's fabulous. And it's faster because it's got a more powerful engine. And I remember just after I bought the Monarch, quite a few people said to me, oh, you know, but you're really annoyed now because, you know, you bought the Monarch and, you know, David Baker's car's quicker. And at the time, I didn't see it that way. I said, well, you know, David Baker's car's lovely. David Baker's lovely, the car's fabulous. It's just, I just really fell in love with the Monarch. It comes back to my pursuit of a particular car. I didn't care the fact that the Schneider is now faster. I fell in love with it when Mark had it. I used to borrow it from Mark and then persuaded him to sell it to me. Mark's borrowing it back. I've lent it to Mark for the members' meeting because I'm in the Fiat, so it'd be good to see him drive it for the first time in years. So it's just a lovely, lovely car to drive. Nearly.
20 years ago I last drove it. It's gorgeous, you know, the sequential gearbox all came back to me. You know, the brakes seem to be strangely good compared to what I'm used to. You know, it looks good, sounds good, yeah, good car.
The last 5 years, the reaction has become more extreme. It seems more extreme. Even to me, it seems more extreme. So the reaction is quite startling, I think, from other members of the public. Just because I think they consider that old cars should be slow. And it's not really fast, but it's more than fast to keep up with modern day traffic. I always thought I wanted a Fraser Nash, but in fact the N of GN is Archie Fraser Nash, and it's what he did, the cars he built with Ron Godfrey before setting up on his own. And I'm passionate about GNs, so I'm very lucky to have two GNs. One with an OX5 V8. It was Mark's concept of an engine I already had, and I had the chassis, an original chassis, and I had all those components, so it seemed quite fun to build a V8 GN. And then I built the GN with the OX5 in it. At the time, I had a black and white photograph of a GN that was raced at Brooklands, 200-mile race GN at Brooklands, and it had, you can see in the black and white photographs, it had checkerboard paint scheme. And I was in the local pub, and a friend of mine works for ICI, I was talking about the GN, and I got some photographs, and I said, this is the body style I'm going to put on the car, and I'm going to replicate the colour scheme of this car that raced in Brooklands. I said, the trouble is, it's a great shame. I just don't know what the colours are, because it's a black and white photograph. And he said, he was completely deadpan. I'm giving it away now, but he was completely deadpan. He said, well, I can tell you what the colours are. And I said, oh, well, really? He said, yeah, get me as many copies of the photos as you can. I'll take them to work. We've got a mass spectromizing device-y, machine-y thing that will tell us exactly what the colours are. And I said, wow, that's amazing. So anyway, 10 days later, he turned up to the pub again with the photographs and 2 Pantone colours. So I took it home. So I spent the best part of 2 months. You wouldn't believe how difficult it is drawing squares on a car, because none of them are squares, and they all have to line up in every direction. And it looks simple, but it took me 3 months to paint that blasted thing. Painted the colours on judiciously. Took the car to the pub. 4 months later, took the car to the pub. At which point, I said, there you go. I've done exactly, I've used the Pantone colours, and I said, I can't tell you how excited I am that I've matched the original colours of the car racing at Brooklands. At which point, the whole of the pub fell about in hysterics, because quite clearly you can't tell. You can't tell what the colours are from a black and white photograph. It's a black and white photograph. So unfortunately, I was taken in by that hook, line and sinker. But there you go. Hence the orange and purple. He just thought they were the the stupidest colours he could think of, which is why he wrote the Pantone codes down. But I really like them now, so it doesn't matter. It's become part of the car. But it was, it was all started out as a bit of a spoof. The Fiat's been fab. The Fiat is probably the pinnacle of my obsession, I suppose. I became obsessed with old cars from my father. My father genuinely gave me a book of which this car was in. I know in 2003 I was on a road trip, and a friend of mine said, if you want to restore an Edwardian chain drive racing car, the only one to do is the S76. So it wasn't an easy task. I mean, I didn't find it in a shed. That's the thing. I went on a sort of 6 or 7 year quest to find all the remaining bits of the 2 cars that were built and assemble it as one car. So it isn't I know that some people get very vexed at the discussion of whether it's a restoration or a recreation. At the end of the day, I've restored all the original bits. In my eyes, it's a restoration, but it's certainly something I'm most proud of. And I think it's restoring this car. I think I used all the experience I had from the other cars, and wouldn't have been able to do it if I hadn't had the experience of working on the other cars and bikes beforehand. And I learned so much from doing it. And I think I enjoyed the journey of restoring it and researching it and getting the details right, certainly as much as driving it. I mean, driving it is sensational, but I really enjoy the research and the detail. And there's details about this car that nobody will ever know, that I know are exactly correct, period, that you won't see and nobody will see because they're buried deep inside the car. But there's stuff that I spent 18 months making or researching or finding out about that will make no difference how it drives, no difference how it looks. But to me, it's essential to the feeling of driving an S76 on the road. If you're going to drive an S76, it needs to have the wanky clutch, and it needs to have the foibles it had in period. There's no point in changing things just for the sake of making it easier. So, and it isn't that easy. This stems from my passion for Victorian cars. This is a Salverson, 1895 Salverson. Well, built between somewhere between 1893 and 1895. At a time when nobody knew what a car was supposed to be like. It's currently my most favourite car. I'm the 4th owner in 126 years. I'm the 4th owner. 26 years. I'm the 4th owner of the car. It's had fabulous history, really original. I got it. I bought it at auction, at the Bonham's auction. I knew the chap who owned it, but I bought it at the Bonham's auction the night before the London to Brighton run, and then stoked it up and drove it down to Brighton the next day. quite intimidating because it's coal-fired steam. I've never driven a steam car or run a steam car before. If I knew in the morning what I knew in the afternoon, it would have been a bit faster. We did 62 miles in 11.5 hours, used about 400 kilos of coal and about 800 gallons of water. But this year, it'll be better because I know what I'm doing now. I'm not so intimidated by it. It carries 40 gallons of water on board, and I'm the engineer. I don't drive it. My wife drives it, and I sit on the back and I maintain the fire, basically. And it sounds ridiculous, but what's nice is none of these cars, the reaction from the public is never one of, it's never the reaction you get in a brand new Ferrari or a brand new Porsche 911. It's very much, I think, either ridicule or amusement or sympathy, maybe. But it's more amusement and joy you seem to get from the public rather than annoyance. Even if you are doing 7 miles an hour and breaking down every 600 yards.
I know what I'm doing.
This is a 66 model Barracuda. The Barracudas, a lot of American cars, they change the model in mid-year. So in August of the year, they change the model. So you hear of a 64.5 Mustang. Well, this is a 65.5 Barracuda because it's a 66 model year made in November 65. This is not a race. It wasn't a race car. This probably took family on holiday or took people shopping. It was a car, but it's exactly the same model they used as the stock racing car in 65, 66. And it's great. It's a bit too heavy. If you want to win, you don't drive a Barracuda, but it's different, it's unusual, it drives really nicely. Matt Jackson drove it at the Revival this year, and having driven lots of cars, Mustangs and Stingrays, Corvette Stingrays, he said it was the nicest, it wasn't the fastest, but it was the nicest handling car he'd driven that he can remember driving. He said it was lovely to drive a car that wasn't trying to kill him the whole time, which is good, I think. Really, really lucky to have a wheel nut, let alone a Bugatti. Bought at a time, luckily, when prices weren't quite so unattainable. This was Bugatti's archetypal Grand Prix car. Designed in 1924, based on a Fiat, interestingly enough. But won so many things in 24 and 25, the Type 35 Bugatti. It's the Bugatti that everybody thinks about when you think of a Grand Prix car. I was very lucky enough to buy this car from the widow of the SEC past president, who'd had it since 1969. Spent probably 4 years trying to put it back to as it was in 1925. So it's got smaller brakes, it's got cast iron brake shoes, it's got a terrible prop shaft that most people throw away and put a modern prop shaft in. It's got cast iron and steel clutch plates, which are problematic, but they work beautifully when they're all set up right. And it's just a really good car. You could buy this car in 1925 for £1,200. You do 110 miles an hour, and it revs to 6,000 RPM. It's so much better than everything else that was available at the time that you could just go and buy as a sporting young man. Really, really lovely. It's the first time I've driven it this year, and every time I drive it, I keep on thinking I should drive it every day of the week. It's just beautiful. Other people's enthusiasm for what I do inspires enthusiasm in me. And it's nothing better than something that seems relatively normal to me is appreciated by somebody else. When I was younger, we go with my father, we go to museums, you see cars like this static at Bewley. There's nothing wrong with Bewley. They do a fantastic job, as do all the museums. But to take the car out on the road, to make it normal, to make it more accessible, I think that's the thing. It's normalizing these cars. Because 75, 80 years ago, this was normal. There's nothing wrong with driving a brand new Fiat Panda or a Nissan Micra. But there is an element of fun that you can have with transport that isn't necessarily showing off. It isn't necessarily about having a supercar. It isn't necessarily about being the fastest. It's just about enjoying the heritage of motoring and how much fun it can be and how practical it can be. I can lose myself in here. You put the radio on and I can lose myself in here and work on stuff till very late at night. I don't do very much other than work on my cars. I like coming in here and switching the phone off and switching the radio on and spending hours and hours and hours achieving very little, basically. And it's a lovely place to be. And I'm very, very, very grateful that I've arrived here. But I don't quite know how I did it. I really don't. It's just sort of happened. We ended up buying a farm which had a shed, and I ran a business which needed the shed. The business collapsed, and the shed was there, and you move the cars and bikes into it, and then you get another car, another bike, and another project, and then you get a bit of carpet, and you end up lots of crap left over from a sale that's worth nothing. So you stick them on the wall, and you then put the bikes on the wall because you've got nowhere else to put them, and then it just evolved, and it's become I think it's probably become more significant in how it looks and what it is to my friends who come here than it perhaps does to me. I mean, I love it, don't get me wrong, I love it, I love the bits in it, but it's more a means to an end than it was an objective at the start of it. It's easy to take this stuff for granted, but there's a huge amount of work goes into this historic obsession of mine, huge amount of work. Go back to my motorcycle days, and I race historic bikes now a little bit, not as much as I'd like to, but a little bit. And you go to a historic race meeting with bikes, and you see the historic car world from the other side of the paddock fence. Historic racing car world is sort of become dominated by, don't get me wrong, very wealthy people who pay for their cars to be bought for them, maintained for them, prepared for them, even to a extent warmed up in the paddock for them and taken through scrutineering. And that's never been me, and I've never had that opportunity. I've never had the money to do it. I've never had the opportunity to do it. So I always have all the engines I build myself, all the work and all the cars I do myself. With Tucker, who's a great friend of mine. The Tuck's worked with me. Everybody's met Tucker. Tucker's worked with me for 25 years. Started out as a sort of come and give me a hand for a couple of hours a week, and it has never gone away. And I couldn't do anything I do without Tucker's help at all. But there's just the two of us, and I enjoy that side of it as much. That side of it is the preparation of the cars, the working on the cars, the research, the detailing of the cars is as much the hobby and the enjoyment as the racing, probably more so. So the workshop is part of that. The workshop is probably a bigger part of my historic car obsession. A friend of mine who wanted to go historic racing said to me once, he would come to every meeting. He'd come to Goodwood, he'd come to Donington or whatever, and he'd see me just for that race day. He'd say, "Oh God, God, it must be brilliant doing what you do, and it's great, isn't it? It's so easy." And I remember thinking, you'd have no idea, you have no idea how much work, how much months, years work goes to getting to that one day. And also how much work's involved even either side of that one day. It might look easy, and I think for some people maybe it is because they can afford to pay people to do all that stuff for them.
We try and do things how they used to do it years ago. All these people that trailer the cars to a meeting, where's the fun in that? Years ago you used to get up, drive to the meeting, race it, drive back home again. You check your race tires in the back or something like that. Well, people don't do that. But to me, that's how they used to do it. So you're preserving what went on years ago. You're actually preserving it and hoping that people will pick up on it and do the same later on when we're past the post, if you know what I mean.
But I don't think, even if I could afford to pay for it, I would do it, because I get so much enjoyment out of doing all the peripheral stuff, the preparation of the cars, the going to scrutineering, the sort of warming up the car and the paddock, the testing. We go testing quite a lot. I go testing as much as I possibly can. That's just brilliant. And you need the workshop for that. So that's why, coming back to where I started from, I'm not a collector. I know it might seem that way, but I'm not, because it's the whole package. And without the workshop, which is fundamentally part of that, you can't get to the race meeting. You can't rebuild the Barracuda. You can't take the wheels off the steamer and have them rebuilt by somebody. You can't do all this sort of stuff unless you've got a big workshop. And it's just evolved off the back of the obsession I have with cars, as opposed to something I set out to establish and create. And I love it.